All right, taping has started. I will tell you, just so you're aware of this, it's not like it's a big thing or anything, but yesterday my furnace went out. So and it literally got down under 60 degrees in my house, and we had somebody come over and it has to be replaced, so they'll be replacing it today. I'm hoping it won't be noisy, but I guess we'll find out. All right, today is day 14, the 31st of January, and we're going to go over chapter 9. I did send you a folder this morning that had a bunch of stuff in it. I'm going to go over some of that stuff. All right, tomorrow morning by 7 o'clock, I will email you a chapter 9 pretest. I will go over that pretest for about 10 or 15 minutes at 8:05. And then give you the rest of the period to work on it, because working with Flexbox, as we will in chapter 9, and then grid in chapter 10 is just different from anything we've done so far. And then I plan on creating the pretest from scratch on Thursday. Friday will be our typical day. All right. Now, I did mention the chapters 4, 5, and 6, I would give you until the end of the day today to turn them in. If you remember, yesterday we went over the 2-column format, and we did that for the Halloween um, exercise. And then we did the 3-column format. We went over that for the shape up exercise. All right. So if you do need to work on those, you've got, like I said, until that time to get that stuff turned in. All right. And Sunday, chapters 7 and 8 will be due. And sometime early next week, and I'm talking probably either Monday or Tuesday, you will have your next hands-on test, and it will be on chapters 7, 8, and 9. Then next week, we will go into chapter 10, and you'll have another test, because when we get into grid in chapter 10, quite often you combine grid and Flexbox together. All right. So we'll have a test just on that. So with that said, let's get going. All right. So one of the things that I sent you this morning was this. I'm not going to go through all these, but I want to mention a couple things, because you know as well as I do, people learn differently. All right. Some people can go out to a site like W3 Schools, and they can just take a look at the examples and basically just start using them. So I've got here first the URLs for W3 Schools Flexbox tutorial and W3 Schools Grid tutorial. And neither one of them, to be honest with you, are that long. Just so you know, they're not really that long. All right. One of the kind of quintessential websites for learning CSS is a site called CSS Tricks. And as you can see there, we've got both a complete guide to Flexbox and a complete guide to Grid. And again, today we're going to be talking solely about Flexbox. Next week, we'll get into Grid. All right. These right here, all right, I'm going to show you something right now. I'm going to recommend that what I'm about to do, you kind of follow along with me. All right. There's a guy out there in internet land that offers a lot of stuff for free. And his name is Wes Bose. And I think it's just WESBOS.com. I could be mistaken, and I'm not. All right. So he's got all sorts of courses. And if you click right here, it says free and premium courses. What does that mean? That means some of them are free and some of them are not. All right. But if you start to go through his stuff, all right, you'll notice when you look long enough, you have to go a ways through here. This one is free, this JavaScript 30, and we're not going to go into JavaScript yet, but we're getting there soon. This is one I would strongly recommend you sign up for. It's out on cssgrid.io. Notice a free 25 course on all there is to learn about CSS Grid. And as it says, it starts with fundamentals, and it's just chock no way of knowing whether you do or not, but I would strongly recommend that you sign up for that. It's free. All right. And I don't remember ever getting an email from him after I signed up. Sometimes when you sign up for these places, you'll get these, hey, I've got this new course coming out. This guy, he's got enough people who sign up for his courses. I don't think he needs to do that. So he's got one on grid. And if you keep going down, the other one is what the Flexbox. And that's at flexbox.io. And he said, Flexbox sure is tricky to learn, get a grasp on it while learning fundamentals and real world applications. All right. Again, you don't have to do this. I just would suggest you do. All right. And again, everybody's going to learn this stuff differently. Now, some people like games. And I got sent this a couple weeks ago. I didn't even know it existed, but it's called Flexbox Zombies. All right. And that's what it looks like. It's basically a game that you can learn or you can use to help learn Flexbox. Now, what we used to do here is we made you go through this. You still can. It's actually pretty well done. The animations and stuff in here are a little bit simplistic, but literally it's a frog that you move around on screen, and it's Flexbox Froggy. Again, if you want to do that, you can, and if you don't, you don't have to. All right. And then finally, there's the Grid Attack, which is a game to learn grid. This site that's right here is kind of neat. The CSS Zen Garden, if you get a chance to check it out. What it is they have people who they have a site that's out there on Zen Garden, and they have people who have created this site using different types of CSS, and they probably have hundreds of examples of the same site and how different you can make it look by using different types of CSS. All right. And then finally, as it says, there's a grid example, and that's all this is. It's just filled with examples. All right. So with that said, I'm going to jump into the book then. So again, we've now covered chapters 1 to 8. And again, when you take your next test early next week, either Monday or Tuesday, it'll be on chapter 7, chapter 8, and chapter 9, which we are about to go over right now. Next week, we'll go over chapter 10. The following week, we'll have a test on that. And then, believe it or not, what I'm planning on doing is the following week, I'm going to go over all this. And you're not going to be tested on very much of it, just a little bit. But I want to go over all this and then all this the next week. And then we're done with this book. So I'm hoping within 3 weeks or so, at the most, ideally before that, we'll be done with the book. All right, because I want to get into JavaScript where we really start doing some programming. So let me see. Off times when I bring this up in the morning, because I had it yesterday, I might have to start this up again. And it looks like it will. There we go. All right, so chapter 9 starts on page 295. How to use Flexbox layout for responsive web design. Okay, I didn't mention this earlier. Let me just quickly say it, and I mean quickly. In this folder that I sent out to all of you this morning, I already mentioned this document right here, so I'm not going to open it up. But I've got a bunch of, I've got 3 folders. One that's called multi-column, and what I did was I went out to developer.mozilla.org, which is an excellent site for anything web. And I found this article in here, a column layout. And all these are hyperlinks. They're all working hyperlinks. And they got different links to different articles, etc. in here, if you're interested in that. All right. So, and you might say, well, I don't really care. That's okay. But then when we jump into here, into Flexbox, here are some articles. I'm not going to open any of them. All right. But there are some articles right there. And on those articles, they're again from developer.mozilla.org. All right. Okay. Then what else is in here? Well, Murach has one example in this chapter of using Flexbox, one example. So I'm going to bring that up in a minute. All right. I went out because there's a guy that I follow online. His name is Brad Schiff. He does a lot of videos. Some he charges for, some are free. But he had a very nice video. It's about 50 minutes long on Flexbox, and I stole his code. I'm not saying it's mine. It isn't. I've got another one here by another guy that I follow named Brad Traversy, and this is again about 50 minutes long. All right. Then I've got here Evan URLs, and of course it's blank because I didn't go through this. But okay, if you go out to youtube.com, all right, and you put in me, you already know this. There's Jeff Scott Rankin Technical College, and that's my stuff. But there's also Evan Gudmisted, and Evan is my counterpart. Okay. And he has got in here. In fact, if I type in Evan Gudmisted and I'm going to type in Flexbox, he's got a whole bunch of videos that he created. Here's one that he did, I believe, he taught this class last summer. And this is how he went over chapter 9. All right. And then he's got examples where he actually made some sites, including this website from scratch. I'm going to take a look at that later. I haven't had time to. All right. So that is another thing you can look at. All right. But in the Murach example that's in here, it's really simple. So let's just take a quick look at it, and then we're jumping right into the chapter. All right. This is the whole thing. 20 lines, basically. All right, 21 lines. So what he has in here is basically this was built pretty much just using the Emmett stuff. And then in the body, there's literally just a nav bar. That's it. It's a nav bar. And it has, now I changed what's in here to home, about, resume, portfolio, and contact. There's a reason I changed it. I don't want to go over it right now. But the point is, if I run this right now, if I run it, it's going to look like this. Okay. And there has been some styling put on this, some color, background color, sizing, etc. But the other thing that was added in here in the CSS, and I'm showing it to you like this because this is your first look at this, is what's called a flex container. So if you want to make something flexible, all right, you basically put display flex there. And then once you do that, you can take the other things that are in there and make them what are called flex items. Now, you just saw this, and you saw exactly how that looked. Now, that's at 300%. So at 100%, it looks like this. All right. But I want to make one simple change and show you how this looks. I'm going to change this from column to the word row, and I'm going to save it and then come back here and you say it doesn't look any different because I have to refresh. And now you can see what happened. All right. And typically when you do this, you have to put a little bit more stuff in there. But notice when we do this now, basically, what is it doing? Well, it's kind of adjusting itself accordingly. All right. Now, what I would recommend, and again, these are recommendations for me. I can't make you do anything. But since this is such a simple example, I would recommend that you open this one up after the lecture today and then go into the CSS Flexbox thing in here and start looking at these examples and play with them with either the stuff that's in here or with the Murach example. All right. Okay. So not a long chapter. It's only about 24 pages. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the chapter. Then I'm going to go through the examples that Brad Schiff did. Then I'm going to go through, it's a single example that Brad Traversy did. My guess is that we'll be done today no later than 10 o'clock. All right. And the rest of the period will be for you. Remember that I will take your chapters 3 to 5 work, or 3 to 6, I guess it is. All right. I will take that stuff through midnight tonight. While you guys are all taking the pretest tomorrow, I plan on grading that stuff. All right. And hopefully it'll all be out there also. I'll have everything graded through chapter 6 by tomorrow. Now, with that said, that's the last time I plan on grading anything. So if you're behind, let's assume that person A never did the written test for chapters 1, 2, and 3. All right. You can still turn them in, but if you turn in work late, you have to send me an email and let me know, because it's not my responsibility to dig through all your stuff that was already due. So I'll still give you partial credit. All right. Okay. So we've got an introduction to Flexbox layout, followed by how to set the different properties. And if I were you, I would really take a little bit of time. We will, but I would take a little bit of time to look at the responsive web page example that uses Flexbox on here. In fact, what I will do, you've all got this. I've got a folder that I called Spring 2023. This is what I sent all of you. All right. So if I bring this up and I go to student download, and I think it's book apps, but I'm not sure. And this is chapter 9. All right. This is that town hall thing. And if I bring it up, it may or may not look that different from what we've done before. But notice as we come through here and start making it smaller, all right, you can see how much it's changing. Now, when we've done this before, we have done this using a combination of floats, all right, and basically, some floats and some media queries. What Flexbox and Grid are designed to do is to get rid of floats more than anything else. And most developers will tell you it's not even that floats are that bad. They're just kind of cumbersome to work with, where you got to float it this way and float something else the other way. Then you have to remember to clear the floats, etc. All right. So as it says, although the box model and floats work well for simple pages, as your website gets more complex, all right, as your website gets more complex, all right, just using media queries and floats is really a pain. All right, and again, remember, because chapter 8 was on responsive web design, RWD, so is chapter 9 and 10. Flexbox and CSS Grid were both designed to help with responsive web design. All right, so the basic concepts here, and I'm not going to read all these, there's so much junk in here, but I do want to mention in this first paragraph, it says you can see a Flex container contains Flex items. These are laid out on two different axes, and either the main axis can be horizontal, all right, and what's called the cross axis can be vertical, or the cross axis can be horizontal and the main axis can be vertical, depending on whether you're working in a row format or a column format. If you're working in a row format, it's pretty much, if you remember, in fact, let me just show you this. When we looked at this, that's a columnar format. We've got everything laid out in columns. All right, but remember that when we did this, and I made this, all right, I guess I said it backwards. So that's in a row format. What's there? We're in one row. All right, but when we do it like this, now we're columnar. All right. And again, this is what this chapter is all about. And as I mentioned, all right, as I mentioned, what you really should do when we get done with the chapter here is go through some of these examples that I'm going to go through today. All right. And it says, what Flexbox does best is to simplify how elements on a page are laid out side by side without using floats. It makes it relatively easy to change the entire look and feel of a website by just changing some of these different attributes that Flexbox makes available to you. All right. Now it says it's most appropriate for laying out components like navigation menus and small page layouts. Really, you can do an entire website, even a complex one. You can do all with Flexbox. But what you'll see when we get into talking about grid next week, when your websites start to really get complex, then typically you use either CSS Grid or even more commonly, a combination of Flexbox within Grid. All right. So when we look at the example here, the example, that's the same one that I showed you, but I just changed the names rather. So ours was home, about, portfolio, or resume, portfolio, and contact. All right. So again, notice they're talking about something being a main access and something being a cross access, but it can differ. Again, depending on whether you've got something laid out in a row format or a column format. All right. And again, that is explained down here. I don't want to read to you. All right. So the container in this case, if this is an unordered list, the container, all right, is the unordered list. The list items, so the container is the flex container, the unordered list itself. The list items are the flex items. So a container is made up of items, or it contains items. All right, so this is again pretty similar to the example that I just went over with you. Now, you're going to have to, if you haven't read the chapter, I really and truly think you will have to, for lack of better words, to kind of be able to wrap your arms around everything that's going on in here. So they start by talking about display and flex direction. All right, so it says display, the name or the type of box. All right, and for right now, we just are concerned with display flex, not display flex inline, but for now, just display flex. And I've already shown you the directions, row and column. All right, so as it says right here, this is how you set it up. Okay. So they've set it up in a columnar format. So you can see, yes, we have one column, okay, but it's spread out over multiple rows. And you already saw the difference between coming in there and putting in flex direction column and flex direction row. All right. What this has, though, is it's got some pre-written stuff that's going to make it much easier for us, that as we go in and we come in here and we do this, changing the screen size to make something smaller and smaller and smaller, all right, it's going to make it much easier for us. All right, there are a lot of flex properties. Some of them are shown in the next figure here. And again, one thing I don't like about Murach books, and there's not that much, but one thing I don't like is, now that you understand how to create it, well, you know what? You had a page on it. That's why I said you'll have to go in and you'll have to play with it a little bit. It says you're ready to learn about other flex properties that let you align and wrap flex items. All right, allow you to set dimensions, change order, etc. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do. All right. So it says the next figure shows you how to align these along the main axis, right? Now, when you do this, hopefully at least, it's going to make sense to you. What do I mean? Well, just imagine for a second that, and I'm going to just throw this out there. So imagine that right here, this is my area. So in other words, I don't care if, we can imagine if we want to. All right, we can imagine that what's going to go in here is is some kind of a navigation area. Okay, so why am I showing you this? Because notice what they have here. If we have flex start, that'll be pushed all the way over to the left. Flex end will push it to the right. Center will center align it. Now, then there's a few other things. There's space between, there's space around, and there's space evenly. All right. And again, this is that same example that we were looking at. So let's look at these examples. You'll notice what space between does, all right, is it puts an equal amount of space between each thing that's in there, but there's no padding at the end. All right. When you do, so that's a space between. A space around is the same thing, except it allows for some default margin or padding at the end. Well, some people don't like this because they see this and this and this and this, but why isn't this the same size as this is? So that's spaced evenly. So then you'll notice the spacing here, 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 etc. All right. There's flex end where basically it's right justified. If we set it to flex start, it would be left justified. And if we set it to center, all right, if we set it to center, it would be center justified. All right. And again, what I did before class, I didn't save it or anything, but I went out here, and I started going through the examples that are in here. So again, there's flex direction column. Right, you can see exactly what this looks like. All right, if I come back in here and change this from column to row, you should already have an idea of what that's going to look like. And you'll notice here that as I make this smaller, you can see how much room it provides. All right, but if I were to come in here and grab these divs, now there's like about, I don't know, 18 of them, and I run this, notice what it does. It's taken everything and it's made it smaller. All right. But without us even doing much of anything, it's doing the best it can to try to scale stuff for us. Right now, that's typically not going to be what you want. That's going to look pretty doggone ugly. But again, as I mentioned to you, if you come in here, it's very simple. There's not that much in here. All right. There's a little explanation of what Flexbox is. Okay. And then there's a thing with Flex Container where it goes through the examples that are here. Then there's a thing on Flex Items where again, it's going to have some more examples there. And there's examples for each of the thing they mentioned there. And then there's how to use Flex responsively in a website. All right. So it's got here properties for aligning Flex items along across axis. Maybe a little bit confusing to look at. I don't remember if there's an example here or not. Yes, here we go. So the first thing they mention here is align items. And notice what they've done in the example here. For the home, okay, they set it to flex start, which means it pushes it up into the upper left-hand corner. But it's just aligned self. The rest of them, all right, all of the rest of the ones are aligned in the center. Now, you might look at that and go, well, that's really ugly. Why would you ever want to do that? That isn't the point. The point is that you can do it. All right. Now, when you're working on this, if we'd have left this one out here, this one that you see in yellow, if we did just not put it in there, this home would be, we put right there in the center because that's how we told it to align the items. All right. So I've already mentioned a little of this. The common values for aligning the items and aligning the self stretch is the default. Basically, it says, kind of be greedy and use start at the beginning and go to the end. Center will center align. Flex start will basically align them in the upper left-hand corner. Flex end in the bottom right-hand corner. All right, there's a baseline as it says right there. And as you notice, it says the content within each one is aligned at the bottom. And there's auto. That's if you're doing something special with self-align. All right. The way that you are going to learn this stuff is not by listening to me talk about it. All right. But like I said, hopefully when we go through a couple of the examples, after we get done with the chapter here, it'll start making a little bit more sense. But you can make dramatic changes to a website, web page, whatever you want to say, all right, by just making a couple changes using Flexbox. All right. Now, how to wrap and align. I've actually kind of started showing you this already. And that is this, that if you had this right here, okay, and you started making it smaller, all right, so what am I telling you? Well, let's look at that example that I'd shown you before. And let's go back here where we had it. Let's set it back to row, right? And we'll go back to here and we'll refresh. All right. Well, notice what happens when we come in and we keep making it smaller and smaller. Watch what happens. Right? That doesn't look bad. All right. It actually looks pretty good. But what they're saying here, if I can use their example, that is if we go in and we change this, all right, let's just change this to home page, about page. I don't even know if this will be big enough, but we'll see. Page here and here and here. All right. Oh, should have changed it, but it didn't. So let me go back and refresh. There we go. And you can see what happened. It now pushed it into two lines. It's still doing the best that it can to hold everything. That may be what you want. That may not be what you want. Now, the reason that that worked and the reason that in the book it looks a little bit different, actually in the book it looks much uglier. Okay, it looks like this. And the reason for that is because of the sizing that they put in here for each one of these things. But notice what happens. That's not going to be what you want. So what I'm saying is, by default, when this thing gets down to a certain size, you might want this to wrap. So it goes over two, maybe you have got, if you could get it that small, maybe you would have home and speakers on the first row. Then on the second row, you'd have get tickets and become a member. Then on the third row, you'd have about us. All right. Something more like this. And you notice that if you want to do that, you have to turn wrapping on because it's off by default. So you have to say flex wrap and then wrap. The good news is the majority of the stuff that's in here, all right, when you use a flex command, the majority of the commands that are in here, typically at least, make at least some sense. All right. So here they've come in and notice they've done two things. All right. They have said both that they want it wrapped and they want align content center. Pretty much looks the same way as this one. The point is though, you can add not just flex wrap, you can add anything you need to add in here. All right. So again, notice by default, they're not wrapped. So as it says, when you get to a specific width, the results can be indeterminate. In other words, typically not going to be what you want. All right. Okay, how to allocate space for these different flex items. What you can do is you can say, hey, as my screen gets bigger, I want you to grow. As my screen gets smaller, I want you to shrink. Now, there's more than that, because again, if we go back here, by default, the way that this is set up is each one of these, each one of the things that you see in here, all right, each one is the same size. You don't have to do that. All right. You can change it so that the size of each one of these is different. All right. And when you do that, I'm not talking about going in and making one of them 100 pixels, and one 200 pixels, etc. What I'm talking about is using flex, all right, and putting a flex grow and a flex shrink in here. We've got 5 items. And if we wanted to, we could set them as an example to, let's just say 1, 1, 1, 1, 3 as an example. Why am I doing this? Because what that would mean is that when you start to make these grow or make these shrink, these should grow or shrink at 3 times the rate that the other ones should grow or shrink. And the reason that that's important is when you're laying out a page, you may want to set it up so that your main content shrinks less or grows more than the sidebars or whatever it is you've got in there. And that's what they're talking about in here. All right. So again, I don't want to go through this just because, it's all math. All right. And when we look at it, notice there's 2 things in here. It says the flex basis and flex grow properties. All right. Flex basis, the initial length of the flex item. Possible values include auto, units of measure. A lot of people like to do these things with percentages. All right. And then flex grow. So when you look in here, so notice they've used percentages, and they're saying that the nav and the aside, these two, both take up 25%. This takes up 50. So notice as you start to stretch, these two will be the same size. This will be double the size of these two, or this will be basically the same size as these two put together. So you can do it like this, where you use percentages, or what I mentioned. All right. So you can set it up like this. So here it's 3 times the size. All right. So again, by default, they're at 100 pixels each, the nav and the aside, and they're going to grow at the same size, for so to speak. And this is 200 pixels at the start, but as it grows, it's to grow 3 times the size of either one of these. All right. And hopefully that made at least a little bit of sense. Again, I don't want to sit and read here to you. I don't think it's worth my time or yours to do that. All right, and shrink works pretty much the same way. So as you see with flex shrink, as it says, how much an item will shrink relative to the other values. Notice 0 means don't shrink, okay? And the default is 1. Well, one thing you've got to worry about is if you don't allow something to shrink, you're going to get something that looks like this, right? And again, there's lots of ways that you can play with this, all right? Now, this is kind of neat, changing the order, because you would think, let's see what the example is that they have here. Okay, you've got a header, a section, a sidebar, and a footer. And you would think that, hey, if I want them in that order, then in the HTML, I will first put in my header, then I'll put in my section, then I'll put in my sidebar, then I'll put in my footer. And that would make sense. But what if you didn't do it that way? What if you put in your header stuff first, then you put in your sidebar stuff second, then you put in your section stuff third, then your footer? In other words, it was almost the way you wanted it. Well, you can go in and you can change the order. All right. So inside of main here, you are saying that you want the section to be before the aside, even though in the HTML, the aside came before the section. So you are manually changing the ordering in here. All right. Now, one thing is, as you work in here, all right, that when you work with flex, it's designed to be basically 2-dimensional. It works in rows and columns. Okay, pretty much what you think. Next week, when we talk about grid, it's designed to be more 3-dimensional. So not only is there really an x-axis and a y-axis, there'll be a z-axis as well. I don't want to talk about that right now, but that's one of the reasons that grid allows you to do some things inherently that are very hard to do, if not impossible to do, with just Flexbox. So by default, the items within the container are displayed at the order in which they appear, but you can use the order property to change that. Okay. All right. So the rest of the chapter here, and let's take a look at it. All right. We don't normally spend a lot of time doing this, but I'd like to here because we are changing the look and feel of the page as our page size expands or contracts. And now we are doing it without the use of floats. All right. So as it says, the town hall speaker page that uses Flexbox for page layouts. The examples that they put in here, in my humble opinion, this is a pretty simple example. And what I mean is, again, you might say, well, that's easy for you to say. You've been doing this for a while, and I get that. But literally, you can set up a website with Flexbox that's got a boatload of stuff in it. All right. So as it says, they're using Flexbox for the navigation bar and for the main content. And then for smaller screens, it's also used for the header. What does that mean? All right. For smaller screens, to me implies there's going to be some media queries in here. All right. So let's take a look at what's here. We looked at that before, but again, this is how it would look on a laptop or a desktop. And then this is how it would look on a phone. Now, to be honest with you, and you may agree with this, you may not agree, but there's not a lot of difference between these two. And what I mean is they're both showing everything. You may decide that when you go to a phone, you don't even want the picture anymore. All right. Or here, they probably have already clicked this menu. I don't think it would show like that by default. All right. So as it says here, when the page is displayed on larger screen, Flexbox is used for the navigation bar, the article, and the sidebar. For smaller screens, it's also used for the header area. When the screen gets too narrow, as it says, to display the article and sidebar side by side, media queries are used to change the direction from row to column and change the order so that the sidebar comes first. All right, so notice here the sidebar is off to the right, and over here it's on top, and then the other stuff shows. Okay, so again, it's up to us. We can set this any way we want. So again, this right here would probably be a laptop or a desktop. This right here would probably be a tablet, and that would be a phone. All right. Hopefully, one thing that you can see, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but I want to say it again, and that is what we're doing here. This, when you start to really be able to conquer using Flexbox and using Grid, when you really can start to work with those and develop some familiarity and a little bit of comfort level, for lack of better words, with those. All right, once you are able to do that, okay, you are really, as they say, unharnessing the power of this. All right. And you can lay out really nice looking pages this way. All right. So the HTML for main structural elements. What you're going to find in here, notice, usually what the authors do is, and if there's something new, they put it in here and they put it in, and they have like a mustard colored background to it. There shouldn't be anything that's in here that's new to anybody. All right. You should understand the header section. All right. You should understand the nav section. All right. Notice that they've got nav ID equal mobile menu and nav ID equals nav menu. What does that mean? That means they're already setting this up to be able to lay it out. All right. That when they have it set up for mobile, that's where the menu is going to go, how it's going to show or whatever. Then here's your main area. And you'll notice in the main area, we've got an article. They don't show all of it. And there's an aside in there. And then there's a footer at the bottom. This particular, one thing I like about this book is they are laying out their sites in an HTML5 format. In other words, they're semantic. In other words, They don't have a million divs all over the place. And a lot of you have been telling me that you're using divs, which is okay. All right. But you should also get used to using articles, main, aside, header, footer, nav, etc. Because that's what's considered to be, I don't know if you call it in vogue or whatever right now, but that's how people do it. Now, as it says here, the UL element for the nav bar will be implemented as a flex box that contains LI as the flex items. The main element will be a flex box, and the article and the aside will be flex items. Finally, as it says there, in the media queries for smaller devices, aside and articles will be displayed rather in a columnar format. All right. And the aside will be displayed before the article element. So again, they're just showing you their stacking order. All right. So then they will show you the CSS both for large screens and for smaller screens. All right. So it says here 910 shows the changes made to the CSS so that it now uses Flexbox layout. All right. And as always, again, they made the color on there. So let's take a look. All right. Now, one thing they're not showing in here, and so that, to me, it means it's not necessary in this example, but what you will oftentimes see when you're working with Flexbox and even not with Flexbox. I mentioned this border box thing to you earlier, this CSS box sizing. And when you set the box size up to border box, and it all has to do with counting. And what I mean about with counting, all right, is when you are figuring out the size of something, is it just the content, or do you automatically have the system figure out the content plus the margin plus the border plus the padding? And you'll oftentimes see people set this up, all right, with the border box. Okay, so again, they show that here, and then they'll show it, the one without and the one with. Okay, all right. So here's what's new. So let's take a quick look. So again, notice the navigation menu is meant to be displayed flex, as it says, and the entire width of the page and space around, which means, again, everything should line up kind of nice. The other stuff that's in here, the list style type none, the margin, the padding, that should all be familiar to you. All right. Then we've got the LIs. All right. So those are those list items. What do those say? As it says, each one should take up 20% of the flex box. So again, as it shrinks down, all right, or expands. So you'll notice we've got display flex here, and we've got a display flex here. It is also totally possible when you're laying this stuff out that you can have something that is a flex item that is also a flex container for something below it. I want to say that again, and I hope that makes at least a little bit of sense. All right. So right now, this is a flex item. Let me say that again. It was wrong. This is a flex container because it's got display flex. That's a flex item. This is a flex container. These are flex items. But it is totally legit to have something that was set up as a flex container can also be a flex item for something else. All right. So again, in main, you can see with the aside how they've set it up in here. All right. And I know yesterday one of you had asked, well, it's like, how do you know that was an H2 as opposed to an H3 or whatever? Well, I mean, if you go to work, either if you're working for a company and you're creating websites for somebody, or you're on your own creating websites for somebody. All right. The only way that you can find out exactly what people want is to sit there and start to mock up something for them, show it to them, and see whether or not they like it. And I may have said this before, But it's a lot of times you ask somebody, what do you want? They'll tell you, I don't know. So if you start to create something for them, you'll quickly find out more often than not what they don't want. Doesn't it almost, historically that's the way it works. Oh, I didn't really want that. I didn't really want that. Okay. All right. My wife likes watching this show on TV that's called House Hunters. All right, where you've got typically husband and wife, whatever it is, boyfriend and girlfriend, doesn't matter, that they're looking for they're looking for a house. And usually one of them wants one thing, one of them wants something else, and ideally they'll compromise. All right. Well, the reason I'm telling you that, I used to teach a class that was called Systems Analysis and Design. And in that class, I would show people how to develop an entire system. All right. And some of the people that were my students went on and they became system designers. And I often told them that when you do this, all right, and you are designing a system for somebody, you should really design three systems, any of which could be used. And I call them the Volkswagen, the Buick, and the Cadillac. And the Volkswagen solution was the cheapest, but it gave the least amount of features and functionality. The Cadillac was the most expensive, and it gave the most features and the most functionality. And to a lot of places, the Buick was the one that they would settle on. All right. And it's sort of the same way here, because a lot of times people don't know what they want. All right. They can keep, oh, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? You do that. Oh, I wish you wouldn't have done that. All right. Okay. So as it says here, the image in the header isn't scalable. Floating and clearing are not used for the nav, for the article, and for the elements. All right. Floating again was shown more for legacy purposes because some sites still use floats. All right. But the idea is when you're developing new today, you should be using Flexbox and or grid. So here's the CSS for the smaller screens. All right. And as it says, the media query that changes the display to a single column. All right. So again, when you get down to a certain size, so this is media only, max width of 796. What does that mean? That means when your screen size is between 0 pixels and 796 pixels, rather, this is what's going to take effect. All right. If you want something to remain the same, so in other words, if I wanted all this stuff to remain the same, but let's just say for whatever reason, all right, we wanted this where it says float here, and don't worry about that, the float. But let's say that this margin left, we wanted this to change if it got smaller, but we didn't want anything else to change. All right. Then when we show it over here for header image, you don't have to repeat things that are the same. All right, so in a media query, you only have to show what's changing on something. So that's what they're showing here. All right, previously they set it up as rows for the header. Now it's in a columnar format. Okay, and each thing is centered. So you can see the other stuff that's in here. Notice how they changed the order. Again, when they did the first one, the aside came before the article. Now they're reversed. I'm sorry, I guess the article came before the aside. Now they're reversed. Okay. And that's pretty much what they're saying in here. And that's it for the chapter. So it is 9 o'clock. Let's take 10 minutes. And when we come back, we're going to look at a couple of the examples that I gave you in the folder that I handed out to you today. So I'll see you back here at 9:10. I got to refresh my water, so I'll be right back. All right, it is 9:10, so I'm starting up again. I went out to YouTube and I keyed in there Brad Traversy, Flexbox, as you can see. And when I hit enter, this is what comes up. Okay. Now, he does a lot of different stuff in here. I've not even looked at this. Build a responsive website using Grid, Flexbox, and more. I don't know if that's any good or not. I know the guy has like 2 million followers. He's a millionaire. And this is the one that I watched yesterday, this Flexbox crash course. He's also got one for Grid. Now you notice he's also got one that's 6 years old that says Flexbox in 20 minutes. This is that Brad Schiff one. I don't know if this is the same one that I used or not. He's tell you real quick because his cat is there at the beginning. Yep. Yeah, he says you want to learn some CSS. Yeah. Okay. So why am I telling you that? Well, what I did was I brought up the one from Traversy and I commented out the line where he adds the CSS just so you can see what's in there. But there really shouldn't be anything that's in there that's surprising to you, is what I'm saying. All right. So, in other words, you've got your typical boilerplate stuff that's in here. There's really nothing in here that you shouldn't understand. All right. And then when we get down to here, he's got a nav bar, as you can see. Okay. And he's using a bunch of classes, etc. Don't even worry about that. All right. And then he's got a header section. And then he has a section. He gives a class of box, basically, so it'll line up very nicely. And it's just got an H2 in there. This is font awesome, which we'll talk about, just not today. All right. And he's got a bunch of paragraphs. So he's got a bunch of H2s followed by paragraphs, and they're inside of a div. And those divs all have a class of box. So if I bring this thing up and I run this without any CSS, all right, so the CSS, again, the file that's in there has been commented out. It looks okay. Doesn't look great or anything, but it looks okay. And you'll notice, since, again, we have no styling here, that the menu looks like this. Well, then notice what happens when I come back in there. Let's try that again. When I come back in there and I take that line and uncomment it. Now, again, it looked like this, and now it looks like this. All right. Which, as you can tell, is a lot different. This is much more reminiscent, really, of a landing page than the one I had you build for your test. Now, these don't work. Part of the reason they don't work is everything is on the page here. All right. But what you'll notice is when you come in here and you make it smaller, it looks really pretty nice. All right. And he's got the stacking that takes place automatically, etc. All right. So I don't want to spend much time on this, but just if you do go in here, all right, and I didn't even make a separate folder. I just put the CSS file right here. All right. So if we take that and we open this, and he's got enough. He's got over 100 lines in there. All right. But a lot of it is just for stuff that we've talked about before. This import statement, don't worry about this. We're going to talk about this as well. There's two ways that you can actually bring different files in. All right. When you're talking about CSS files, one is the way we've been doing it, and that's the way most often it's done. But you can also do imports, and we'll get into that in a later class. So again, you'll notice he starts with the box sizing border box, removes any margin, removes any padding. Then in his body just sets a font family, a font size, a line height. Again, nothing new in here. The images, he says max width. All right, he puts a margin bottom on his H1 and his H2s. All right, removes the dots or the whatever the list item thing in there, a dot or a circle or whatever. And then he's got his container. All right, so this is what's holding everything. And you'll notice he says, I want it to have a max width of 1100 pixels. I want there to be no top or bottom margin, and I want the left and right margins to be centered, basically. Adds a little padding. And then he's got his stuff in here for his nav bar, his nav bar logo. I just want to hit on, the nav bar, there's nothing in there you haven't already seen. The logo for the font size, you can go in and rather than what we've been doing, where we've been saying like font size equal 3 rem or whatever, you can come in there and again, you can use percentages, you can use pixels. There's also a few built-in constants like X large. I think there's XX large, large. Then there's XX small, X small, and small. All right. The way that you bold in your CSS is you say font weight bold. And when you do that, you can use bold. I think there's bold, bolder, etc. There's also numbers you can use between 100 and 900. And the bigger the number, the more bold. Almost always you see it done like this. All right. So the nav bar, the links, we've got they're white in color. Text decoration, none. You should understand what that means. The size and the weight, nothing new there. Here it's saying when we hover over it, it should be a light blue. All right. And here's where it starts. So this, like I said, there's 125 lines, but it's only about the second half or so, a little more than the second half. All right. So what we're saying here is we want the nav bar and the container, both of those classes. So everything that we see in here that's inside of our nav bar, again, which is all of this, and everything we see in here, which is in our container, which is, looks like at least, it goes further than this. Let's see. Yeah, right there. So there's one container. Here's another container. All right. So basically, it's everything that's in there. And those are both acting as flex containers. All right. You can see the justify content. So again, if we change this as an example, if I come in here and change this from space between to space around, all right, just make that one change and then come in here and refresh. It wasn't much of a change, but it did change a little bit in here. All right. But again, most of that will be predicated on how many things you have in here, etc., how big it is. But you could come into this one in here and you could make any changes again that we talked about before. All right. Notice the unordered list. The unordered list is also used as a flex container, very similarly to what we saw before. All right. So as soon as you make that, basically, as soon as you make that a container, everything that's in it basically is automatically an item. All right. And that's kind of what he's showing here. And remember, the header up here, all right, the nav bar and the container here. So we looked at the nav bar already. This is the header, so nothing special here. Now we're getting down to, notice the header and container are again both. All right, so there's all sorts of changes that could be made in here. The boxes are flexed. All right, so you can flex virtually anything in here. And then finally with the media queries, all right, so this is saying again between a screen size of basically 1 to a 768 pixels. This is what we want to do. Notice the flex direction column. All right. And I already showed you this, but just to remind you, when it gets small enough, it stacks. All right. And that is exactly what we told it to do right there. Now, looking at that, I'm going to show you one thing quickly because it may not make a lot of sense to you right now. But when we get to here, so we're saying that up until it's 768 pixels, we want them to stack. So if I start stretching here, all right, so you notice what happens. So right about there, that must be around 767 pixels. And then when it gets to 768, it does that. All right. That's pretty much it. So like I said, that was I'm not going to say that's a simple example, but one of the reasons I grabbed that, I mean, I watched his presentation and I thought, well, I mean, it's something that you could sit and play with, for lack of better words. All right. So let's take a look at the ones. There are 6 of them in the Schiff article, and I want to look at least at most of them, if not at all of them. And the way that I set this up, he literally has what's called a code pen out there. And I want to show you a couple things real quickly. All right. So I'm going to go, and I think it's codepen.io. I believe that's what it is. We'll find out. Yeah, that's what it is. So what you can do in here is you can sign up for an account and you can type this in. It, for lack of better words, all right, it's called a sandbox. So you can come in here and basically put anything in here you want, all right, and then run it. So you can put in HTML, you can put in CSS, you can put in JavaScript, etc., and do whatever you want. All right, there's a lot of these different things. There isn't just CodePen. There's other ones. All right, I don't want to talk about them right now because we actually will look at this and some of this stuff when we get into the JavaScript part of the class. All right. But the reason I'm telling you that is if you watch Schiff's video, he's got all of it put in there as a code pen and he delimits them. So I grabbed everything out. So if we look right here, again, what I'd like to show you is what this looks like without the CSS and then with the CSS. The first example is really, really simplistic. Whoops. That's it. So in other words, there's a form and there's a label that says name followed by a text box. Okay. And then there's another label that says color, favorite color, and there's another text box. So for right now, I'm going to grab this link and I'm going to cut it and then I'm going to run the file. All right. And hopefully you notice it doesn't look very good, not lined up, etc. All right. But we're going to put that in there. And then what's going to happen is by default, since we're not going to tell it otherwise, these two things, these two input boxes are going to stretch. And other than a little bit of margin at the end, they're going to take up the entire screen, right? The entire thing. All right. So let's take a look at that and talk about what made that happen, so to speak. So I will put that back in. First, just to prove it to you. Let me open that up. But just to prove it to you, now notice what happens. Oops. Well, I don't know why that would have done that, but let me make sure I saved. I did not. Now I've saved. And you'll notice the difference. Okay. Now, what that does is it made these two, it's not the same size, but they have the same end point. All right. And I'm going to show you in just a second how we could try to change this as well. All right. But, you know, it looks much more professional than what you saw before. So what, you know, again, we'll take a look and see if we can make these two things line up as well in just a second. All right, but let's look at the CSS. You know, what he does is for each one of these 6 examples, for each of the 6 examples, he sets this up. So I'm going to go through this once, but then the only one thing I want to talk about is the flex stuff. So he's saying again, no margin or padding. This will be his font size. This will be his font family. That'll be the background color. All right, again, he's using, I don't know why he repeated that, but he did. He's got some padding on the bottom, and H2s and H3s are basically going to have a certain amount of margin. All right, so let's look on here. It's not very long. Okay, so the first example, we can see all of it right here. Okay, Max width 750 pixels. Then notice the margin. All right. So what's in here? All right. I mean, I'm looking in here and I'm saying, okay, flex. There it is. Okay. It's actually in the form row and it's in the form row input. Okay. Those inputs, what we're saying here is 1. It's always easiest in here. All right. It's always easiest to come in here. And I'm going to comment this out to show you exactly what happens if we don't put that in. Okay. Now it doesn't really look, it looks pretty much the same as it did before. All right. But by saying 1, what we were saying is take the amount of space that's left in here and proportion it the same for both of these things. So again, when we said display flex here, all right, that said what? That said that this is going to be a flex container, and this then is a flex item. Now, I don't know if what I'm about to do will work or not, but I'm going to try it anyway. I'm going to come through here and I'm going to say with 200 pixels. I'm hoping this does what I want it to do, but we'll see. So I made that change. I did that myself. So now notice they're both taking up the same amount of room. All right. So now they do look the same. And if I wanted to do that, I could also come in here again. This is just stuff you can do. You don't have to. But I'm also going to come in here and say text align, whoops, right. Okay. So I've made those 2 changes, these 2 lines myself in here. And now you can see what they look like. All right. And again, I'm not saying I made this better. All right. All I'm trying to show you is that the only thing that was being used in there as a flex item, all right, the only thing that was used as a flex item was the input. And guess what? That's still the only thing that's being used as a flex item. The other stuff, this stuff that I put in here, this, here, and here, that isn't flex. That's just regular CSS that I put in that said, basically, I want each one of you, each one of these things to take up 200 pixels, okay, in there, and I want it to be right justified. So you'll see immediately if I go back in, I don't know if 100 will be too small or not. I don't know. But if I do that, all right, that was actually too small, so it put it over 2 lines. All right. I don't like the way that looks. So again, I would have to sit and play with it. And that's why I said a lot of this, that's what you end up doing. Right? Now, how is that going to look when you make it smaller? Well, you can already see. Not totally flexed. Look at that. That doesn't look very good. So there'd be more stuff, so to speak, that you have to do with it. All right. We'd have to write a media query in here, okay, to say whatever it is we would want to have happen. So that's the first one. And like I said, there's 6 of them and they get, I'm not even going to say progressively harder. They're all different from one another. So we're going to take a look, fairly quick look at each one of them so you can see what's going on in here. Again, this is the tutorial and it wasn't as long as I thought it was. It's 28 minutes and 45 seconds. All right. And, again, with half of the people in this class right now, including I think one of you that's listening, I think this is your first class out of the 4 in the program. All right. And with Grant, I know this is your second one. Now you might not have any idea right now when you graduate whether or not you want to be a web programmer, web designer, or a C# program or whatever. All right. But the only thing I want to tell you is, and again, I'm speaking to everybody, not to you two. I'm speaking to everybody because I hear this all the time. Well, I'd like to learn this, but I don't have 28 minutes and 45 seconds to watch this. You know what? We all have that. All right. So I'm going to look at this one tonight because it's got a flex box and grid basics. I don't know what that is. I've never looked at that one, but I'm going to find the 55 minutes tonight and take a look at that. All right. So that was the first one. Again, you have all of these examples that are in here. All right. Okay. All right. And let's take a look at the second one. Let's do it reverse. So let's look at it first. And there it is. Now, I know that several of you had contacted me when that's why we went over yesterday a 3-column format, saying, what a pain, and we did it yesterday and we did it using floats. All right. Now, if you take another look at this, and I'm going to again comment out the line that puts in the CSS. In fact, I'll just remove it, then bring it back again. All right. Then what you're going to see is, and you probably already figured it out, is a 1-column format. Doesn't look like very much. All right. So let's put it back in, and then let's take a look at the CSS. First, let's double check and make sure it works again. And it does. Okay. And now let's look at the CSS. Again, normally I would make a CSS folder. I did this yesterday afternoon, and I just said, the heck with it. I'm just going to throw it all up there like I've got it. Again, as I mentioned before, this stuff is all the same. These first 20 or so lines are the same in all 6 of these. So let's look here. And you notice it's a little longer, but not a lot. All right. So we've got our column layout. All right. There shouldn't be, again, anything that's in here that's new except the fact that we're saying that our column layout is now a flex container. Well, what's the class of column layout? Well, notice everything that's in here, everything. Okay. These aren't pure CSS file examples. And what I mean is, this is what he put out on his code pen. I did not take the time to go in and add a head section and a body section. And so none of this stuff would validate because it's not quote pure HTML unquote. But we've got this entire thing as our column layout. Then this is our main column. This is our first sidebar. This is our second sidebar. And again, they are all inside of column layout. All right. So there it is. Okay. Now, what are we doing here? We're saying column flex 3, main column flex 3, sidebar flex 1, sidebar 2 flex 1. What does that mean? Again, you can look at it this way, that this is going to take up 60% of the screen. This is going to take up 20% of the screen, and this is going to take up 20% of the screen. In addition to that, even though the order in which we had these, we've got main column, then sidebar 1, then sidebar 2. Now we want the order to be, all right, sidebar 1 should go first. So it should take up the first 20%. Then the main column should come second and take up 60% of the room. Then the other sidebar should come third and again take up 20%. All right. So again, you can see radical differences in here. So for instance, let's just reverse the order here. In other words, we've got sidebar 1 and sidebar 2. Let's change the order and let's make this 3. And let's make this 1. All right. And then let's make each one of these 2. All right. And I'm going to save that. Right, now, if I come back in here and run this, it looks quite a bit different. You might say, no, it doesn't. Yes, it does. Because these each now, all right, this is taking up a third more than these 2, but I made them both bigger. Plus, I changed the order. So there's sidebar 2 and there's sidebar 1. All right, so take a mental picture of that. In fact, we'll just leave that up there. And then I'll go back and change it again. This is how you learn this stuff. All right, so I'm going to make these a 1 again and a 1. And then this one was 1 and this one was 3. All right. So again, you just saw what it looked like right there. And when I refresh, you can see how much it changes. What's nice about that is notice we've now got a nice 3-column format, and we've done that without any worrying at all, about the usage of floats. All right. This is just text. So again, if there were images or whatever in here, we'd have to account for that. All right. So then there's the third one. So here it is. And he did some work here with colors, I guess. But notice that when I make these smaller, what happens? Again, it reaches a certain break point. All right. And it changes the format. Okay. So let's take a look at that. So again, this is the way I like to do this. And that is to come in here, open this up. All right. Take this line out. Go back out here and run it again. Sure doesn't look like much right now. All right. Then go back, put it back in again. Double check to make sure I didn't break anything, and it still works. And it does. And then start breaking it down and taking a look at it. So again, this is pretty darn simple. What do we have? He's got these things called call out. All right. And notice there's a class of call out here. There's a class of call out here. And there's a class of call out here. All right. And what's nice about that then is anything that he applies in his CSS to class callout will apply to all those. And then basically he's even got the same text here. H4 paragraph, H4 paragraph, H4 paragraph. The only thing difference is this says 1, 2, and 3. So again, let's take a quick look in here at the associated CSS. All right. Again, as I mentioned, these first 20 lines approximately are the same for all of them. So let's go down to here. And it's not that big. All right. So the callout container has got a max width. It's got margin. All right. And then each callout, you can notice that each callout in there has padding, box sizing with border box again, a bottom margin, and notice this one says flex basis. What does that mean? Well, I want to show you exactly what that means. When you look at this, okay, that basically what you're saying is this should take up 30% of the screen. So should this, so should this. I don't know if it's exactly 30 because that looks more to me than 5 and 5 right here. All right. But you're basically breaking it up. And you'll notice that if I change this, for example, from 30 to 20, let's see the difference in here then. All right. So we did change the size of the boxes. It'll still work the same. All right. It'll still work the same. But if I do come in here and as an example, I put in 33.3, that's truly trying to give each one of them then a third. All right. Well, it's all stuck together. So what we've done now is we've removed, I guess, that 90% that we're using in here, that 30, that's 30, that's 30, that's 30. And the other 10 came from 5 here and 5 here. So if I go back and change it again to 30, all right, that's 90. 30 times 3, of course, is 90. So what it's saying there is the other whatever is left, put it here and put it here. All right. All right. And he's got a media query here. And as it says, once you reach 900 pixels, then we've got to display flex and do a space between. So we can look at that in just a second. This is a little interesting. There's different ways of doing it, and this is the way he used. All right, notice he's using something called nth child. Now, computers in many ways, when you work with computers, I'm going to just say it like this. I don't know any other way to say it. They're kind of weird animals. And what I mean by that is sometimes when you use computers, you start counting at 0. This is one of those times you don't. All right. So all we're doing here is we're just changing the background colors. All right. And we're changing, he wanted each one to be a different color. We could have used simple colors, black, white, and red, or whatever, etc. But he didn't, which is fine. All right. Then those are just the background colors of those particular divs. All right. So let's look at this and see what happens when we get more than 900. All righty. So right there, I don't know if that's 900 pixels right up there or not. Right, but you can see when we reach a certain point, we go to 3, and when we reach the other point, we go back to 1. So what are we doing there? Well, we just talked about this. All right. So let's take a look at the next one. That was 3 of them. We'll go over the other 3, and then that'll be basically that's all I've got for the period here. So number 4. All right. I don't think this one worked. I don't know what the problem was, but these are numbers. Maybe it did work. Let's see if I make this smaller, what happens here. All right. So I screwed something up when I copied this one over, but let's take a look at it anyway. Right. So we've got here fixed size containers, fixed size 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then let's take a look quickly at the CSS that goes with it. Yeah, something's goofed up because it doesn't give me the background color. Well, the background color is supposed to be black, and it's not doing really any of that. I'm looking here. I thought maybe I spelled something wrong. Example4.css, example4.css. There it is. There. Now let's take a look at it. That looks a little bit better. All right. So you'll notice that right now I'm at 300%. I'm going to just keep knocking it down. There's 200. There's 100. So that's how it would normally look. All right. And notice what happens that when it gets too small, basically that's phone size. And this could have been set up any way that we wanted it to be set up. All right. So again, as an example, these 5 things that are in here could have been nav bar, in part of a nav bar. Now, usually what happens when you get to that point in a nav bar is you use something like that slick nav plugin, or you use Bootstrap and you just put the word menu there. But this doesn't necessarily have to be a nav bar. It could be anything we wanted it to be. Let me close some of this junk here. So let's take a look at the associated stuff for this one. Again, not much in here, but you'll notice. So my guess is, taking a look at this is going to be our flex container. So these can be our flex items. So let's look. And there's our container. All right. And notice now we've added the flex wrap. Again, just so you see this, I'm going to take this out and I'm going to save. So if we run this one again, doesn't look any different now, but notice what happens when we come in here and start changing the size. It all stays on the same line. But what those things have done is they've collapsed into one another. That's not typically what you want. Now, we could also have handled this in another way. We could have said, figured out when we get to the point, let's say right there. I don't know what that is. We could have written a media query, and we could have said, instead of doing this, right now, instead of basically setting it up in this kind of a format, we could have changed it. So instead of more of a columnar format, we could have made it into a row format type of an idea. So there's a lot of ways that this could be handled. And he's showing you in here just some examples of the way things are typically going to be handled. So again, putting that back in and saving will allow the wrapping to take place. All right. And these fixed size, so that's the container. All right. And here are the items. We're not doing really anything special with the items right there. All right. It's just the act of making that the container. All right. And we've also, as it says, justify content with space around. All right. Let's look at a couple more. All right. So this was number 5. This is kind of neat. And I think I mentioned this yesterday, that to be able to center something in the middle of a div, and this black thing is a div, used to take a lot more work, all right, than it does right now. So I can do this, it won't matter one way or the other, but if I take the CSS out, the only thing that'll look different is this will get much smaller and it'll go up into the upper right hand or upper left hand corner. Again, just to show you. Right? So if I come in here and grab this line, cut it out for just a minute, go back to here and refresh. All right. Well, I guess that's all that's in there because the div isn't even showing right now. All right. Remember, because the div is being given color in the CSS. So that's really all we have right now. But as you notice, by default, it's put in that's 0, 0. All right. Because we did nothing on it. All right. To make it look any different. So let's put this back again. And save it. And then let's take a look at the CSS. All right. Now you'll notice really, again, not much in here. We've got banner and we've got center me. So what are those in here? So the banner is the entire thing. All right. I think that's what's going to be our container. And this will be our flex item, the center me. All right. So again, display flex. Right. The other stuff that's in here should at least make sense to you. Now, the key thing to making that thing go right in the middle is this line right here. Margin auto means what we want to do is we want to take the text that is in that div that is got a class of center me, and we want it to have centered left, top, I should say top, right, bottom, and left margins. All right. Typically, what you end up doing is something like this: 0 auto, which means I don't want anything top or bottom. So you'll notice that if I do that and come back in here, it's centered. All right. But basically, it's kind of centered the way it would be centered. Just to show you this, if I were to have come in here, let me go back to it. All right. And I'm going to remove that margin auto 0. I'm just for right now, I'm just going to let's comment it out. And I think this will work the same. We'll find out real fast. Think if I said here, text align center, and I save this. All right. Then if I come back into here and I refresh, oh, it didn't. I thought it was centered, but it didn't. All right. Oftentimes there's more than one way of doing the same thing. That's what I was trying to show you, but I was wrong. All right. So come back into here. You already saw it with 0 auto, but let's remove that 0 again. And that is centering it right on the page. All right. And again, the reason that stuff like that becomes important is, again, imagine that you did have a div someplace on a web page. Maybe it'd be a lot smaller than this, but you wanted something centered, and for whatever reason you wanted it to have, for attention grabbing reasons. All right. All right, then let's take a quick look at the last one. All right. And again, you'll notice with all of these, not much in here. Okay. By now, hopefully you're good enough that you can figure out what's probably going to end up being our flex container, and probably again what's going to end up being our flex items that are in here. What this one is going to do is it's going to split the screen in half, but not exactly the way you think. So if you imagine for a second, I showed you this example before, that if we had this, let's just make it a lot bigger here. What's going to happen is with the, let me grab a line here, see if I can do it or not, is we're going to have this split in two. Maybe I didn't do it perfectly in the middle, but you get the idea. So we're going to have, this is going to be the one thing over here, and then a sidebar or whatever the heck they are, they're going to be like this. So this is going to take up 50%, so is this. But in here, this 50%, all right, will be basically 25-25 type of an idea. And as this grows or shrinks, so will this automatically. All right. Which, in my opinion, at least for whatever my opinion's worth, it's kind of neat the way they've got it set up. All right. So let's run it and take a quick look at it. All right. And again, as you change the size, you can see. Okay. We're getting it smaller, but still, this and this are the same size. They're each 50%. And this are the same size. They may not look exactly like it, but I think it's set up to be like that. All right. So let's take a look at the CSS. Okay. Okay, equal height container, max width 900, margin 0 auto, display flex. So again, as we talked about, that automatically, all right, that one automatically was going to be our flex container. Then we've got our first, our second, and our second is split up into A and B. This is the first example you've seen on this where this is the flex container. These two are the flex items. But this second one is not only a flex item, it's also a flex container. All right. And notice that we've got this set up the columnar type of format. If I change this to row, all right, and I save this, you will notice a marked difference in this. So it's not. Yeah, as soon as I refresh. All right. So you can really see the difference between having a columnar format and having a row format. All right. Now, I find this a little confusing because that says row, right? But when I look at it, these are 2 columns. I almost think they reversed what they should have used for the order in here. They should have called this one column and the other one row. Nobody asked me when they did it, but you get the idea when you take a quick look at it here. All right. So again, for the whole thing, this is the container, and these two, all right, are the items. Well, so are these two items just because of the fact that they're children of this one. But since they are children, we've also made this one a flex container. Let's go back and put it to where it was. All right. And then this, we just changed the color. Sure, it works the same way it did before. And there you go. Now, I went out and looked online. We're just about finished. But I went out and looked online yesterday, and literally I went in here and I keyed into this into Google. I said Flexbox exercises. All right. And I started looking in here, and yeah, there's a courses. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. There's that froggy that I mentioned to you. Like I said, it's a little bit, I mean, there it is. It's a little amateurish. So it says, for example, justify content, flex end will move the frog to the right. So I think you can either copy what's in here and then put it in, or you can manually type it. And you'll notice with that, so you can see how he moved over. All right. And it's a whole bunch of progressions like that. It walks you through, next, and then you'll do the same kind of thing. All right. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's okay. All right. So then I saw this. I went and looked at this. I didn't like this at all. This Flexbox, the CSS workout. All right. Why? Because most of it was stuff I'd already shown you. In other words, there's a couple videos. Most of this stuff I'd already given you. There's Flexbox Froggy. The other one I gave you wasn't defense, but there's another game here for learning Flexbox. All right. And it's spinning, thinking about it. That one, when I looked at it, didn't look kind of as neat as the other one that I'd shown you. All right. But, kept looking in here. And that led me eventually, there's to West Bowes. And I forgot about this because I signed up for this. When I taught this class the last time, all right, these are what you go through in here. All right, right from the top. So the intro, you'll do stuff like this. You'll move stuff around. You'll change it from column to row to column, etc. All right. He's easy to listen to, and I thought it was pretty well done. All right. Again, if you want to take a look at that, and I didn't look at any of the rest of the stuff that was in here. There's more. So there's exercises, etc. This is the one I've already given you from CSS Tricks. Free Code Camp is a terrific website, freecodecamp.org. Notice there's a cheat sheet here. All right. And this, I don't really like their pictures, but you can see they go through stuff in here as well. I mean, I want you to learn this stuff, and people are going to learn it in different ways. I get that. That's one of the reasons at the beginning today that when I provided that stuff and I showed you those resources, I gave you this. So again, if you're more a learner, with W3 Schools Way, these are going to give you, again, a bunch of different examples. These are the West Bowes courses where you're going to be doing stuff. These are games. All right. These are examples. And again, I think I mentioned this earlier. This is that Zen garden. And what you'll see when you look through here, when you start going through it, all right, is they'll have all sorts of different designs. Okay, the road to enlightenment, the beauty of design, where'd they get that from? There's the road to enlightenment, all right, etc. So they'll write it in a whole bunch of different ways. This is kind of a neat example also. All right. So unless either one of you have any questions, that's all I had for today. And tomorrow I will be, by 7 o'clock, you will receive from me, I haven't written it yet, all right, or the one I'm using, I don't know if I'm going to use it or not. If I do, it's going to need some rewrite, all right, but you will have all period tomorrow to work on this. I will be online, but I won't be taping. So if you've got questions, feel free to ask me. Any questions on anything we've gone over today?
I think I'm good, sir. I just gotta apply it to
Yeah.
really get to learn it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, same
All right.
here.
I'll talk to you both tomorrow then. Have a good day.
You too.
You too.
Bye.